from bomb disposal by hand to using robots. It helped make the world safer. From cameras with film to instant digital snappers, it also enabled us to see the people we were chatting to. From landline phones to mobile phones, it enabled us to talk to anyone, anywhere. They were all inventions of the 1970s, a decade of disco dancing, digital devices, and high-priced oil. The cell phone, digital camera, and the hybrid car were inventions that shook the world. Being able to phone from anywhere in the world is now taken for granted. And with 7 billion people on the planet, there are now almost 6 billion mobile phone subscribers. It all started with one engineer who believed nothing was impossible. In 1972, Marty Cooper was a man under pressure and also in charge of Motorola's car phone division.
Back.
Motorola's arch-rival, AT&T, had just invented a brand new system for managing phone calls from cars. Not only that, they had also asked the government for the monopoly of a huge part of the airways on which to run it.
Margaret, get the team together. Conference room. First thing in the morning. Thanks. Bye.
Marty had to ensure that Motorola remained just as competitive.
Marty Cooper was a very energetic, innovative, madcap kind of guy. The kind of person who could envision something and make it happen.
In fact, the right sort of man required when competing against a telecommunications giant such as AT&T.
All right, gentlemen, here's the situation.
In 1972, the only mobile phones were those phones in cars, and both Motorola and AT&T were trying to find ways to make them work better.
Marty Cooper is the kind of person who could see what we needed and then had the engineering wherewithal to make that idea into an actual physical working device.
Mobile car phones were huge, bulky pieces of hardware, connected by a cord to a big transmitter receiver in the boot. They were only mobile because of the car, and they did not even work very well. To just connect a call could sometimes take half an hour. This was because calls from cars were relayed through single, powerful giant antennas that sent and received signals over huge areas and operated on only a few channels. Cooper recognized the new system AT&T had developed would control vastly more calls. To compete, he had to develop a similar rival network. Their idea was to use smaller antennas, but more of them, each operating on hundreds of frequencies they called a cellular network.
Call anyone, anywhere, and you don't...
It was a huge risk because there was a fortune at stake for Motorola.
The smaller the company, the more dangerous it is to take a chance because you don't have the money to back up what you need to do if you begin failing or faltering. A big company can afford to take a risk because it has the money to back up everything, even if it makes a false step. So this was a big thing for Motorola to do. If it didn't work, that could fatally hurt the company.
Right. Look, we have to convince the feds that we're players.
Marty Cooper was competing against a giant, and he was desperate for an idea that would give Motorola an edge. Something to prove that AT&T was not the only cellular network available. While watching a science fiction show on TV, Cooper spotted one character talking into a tiny, handheld, cordless communicator, and it gave him an incredible idea.
If they can do it on Star Trek, why can't we do it here? It made so much sense. Wouldn't it be great to have in your pocket a little thing that you could take out and call anyone you wanted to anytime, wherever you were?
It was a radical idea. If it worked, people wouldn't have to go where the phone was. It would just always be there. It was the answer Marty had been searching for. A portable, personal phone, run off the new cellular network.
A network is a very abstract thing, but a phone you hold in your hand, here is what I invented. We are a serious telephone company by virtue of this device. Here, look at it yourself.
While AT&T was still thinking about a better network for car phones, Marty was now way ahead of them.
Gentlemen, here's what we're gonna make. The Star Trek communicator.
Cooper had to convince his team about his futuristic idea. The mobile phone he envisioned would work off the new cellular network, similar to the car phones. As the caller moved from zone to zone, the call would automatically be passed on from one antenna's coverage area, or cell, to the next. The only issue was that a phone that small had yet to be built. Could it even be done? Cooper was hoping to take advantage of the newly invented microprocessor, a single, tiny electronic chip that did the same job as a number of car phone components, but requiring much less space. However, by March 1973, the Motorola team had a working prototype.
You dial the number, hit send, and you talk.
At the time, it was a technological miracle, and Cooper was not finished.
Marty Cooper had a brand sense of publicity in addition to everything else. Nothing that he did was low-key. He had all this very, very carefully planned.
On the 3rd of April 1973, Marty Cooper arranged a press conference and met a group of reporters at a phone booth.
Gentlemen, I brought you here to make a phone call on this, the first cellular telephone.
And his first call?
Hey, Joel. Marty Cooper from Motorola calling.
To his competitor at AT&T.
Yeah, I'm just calling to let you know that I've invented the world's first cellular telephone. Have a nice day.
So that's the kind of person he was. He loved the process. He loved the game. The first call he makes on his little phone, again, not so little, is to his competitor at AT&T to basically stick it to him. Hey, how you doing? I'm calling you on the very thing that you have not yet invented.
The press was astounded.
You're not going to believe this.
It was a life-changing day.
Freaking amazing. I got to go.
Marty Cooper said that was one of the most exhilarating moments in his life. And he knew that he changed the world the instant he made that successful call.
I think this will catch on.
I think it'll be pretty popular, yes.
Within 2 decades, everyone had one. But now, the small mobile phone is more of a mobile computer with everything at the fingertips. Marty Cooper's big idea had truly changed the world. More inventions of the 1970s. 1976, the Mail Mobile. The newest office robot followed a chemical path in the floor, but didn't avoid everything. And 1979, the portable cassette player arrived and everyone became a walking disco. Most offices around the world are littered with them. The sticky notes with messages on, helping to stay on top during the world of work. They are the brainchild of a chemical engineer who had his own sticky little problem. In 1972, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Sunday morning service was in full progress. But as the choir sang the hymn, 39-year-old Art Fry's page marker slipped out of his hymn book and onto the floor. Hardly earth-shattering, but as he stooped to pick it up, Fry began to think about what had occurred. By the time he had finished, he wouldn't have just solved his bookmark problem, he would have changed the world of work. Fry was born in a small town in Iowa and was educated in a one-roomed school. There wasn't a lot to do, so his dad taught him to tinker.
He started taking me to the dump on weekends. And then I could pick out some things to bring home and tear apart. It taught me a lot about how things were made.
Achieving a PhD in chemical engineering enabled him to become employed by 3M, the huge US company that invented Scotch tape.
I was the original lab nerd, you know. I had 2 pocket protectors, not just one.
But this invention started 5 years before with another 3M scientist, an ambitious organic chemist who is hoping to invent a new spray adhesive, Spencer Silver.
In 1968, I was a young PhD, lots of enthusiasm. I believed in initiative, and I was really anxious to do something earth-shaking. And so I was happy to be in a laboratory where I could explore new ideas and not necessarily answer day by day about what I did.
Spencer's most recent chemical concoction hadn't exactly worked. It stuck, but not very well.
That happens a lot in chemistry. You don't actually fail, you just didn't anticipate those results.
But Silver was intrigued because his new potion had a curious characteristic. When it was reused, it stayed sticky. Further research led to an answer. Silver's unusual adhesive had an unusual molecular structure that resembled the pebbled skin of a basketball. The individual molecules formed tiny round microspheres, creating a bumpy surface, so only the tops of the bumps made contact with whatever surface it was stuck against. This meant that there was just a little bit of adhesiveness, but not very much. Silver applied for a patent for acrylate copolymer microspheres and was convinced the new substance must have some use. He just had no idea as to what.
I thought it'd be very useful as a bulletin board. Now, that's not an earth-shattering product, but it's a product. And, you know, after all, I've been working for 2 years at 3M. I needed to have a product.
The sticky bulletin board wasn't a huge seller, but Silver still had hopes for his magical microspheres.
I don't give up on anything very easily, and I was very stubborn about this process. 3M was initially quite interested. Everybody liked the idea that you could spray the adhesive. And this division that I took it to, they were very interested in it too, but the interest kind of waned for some odd reasons, well, some substantial reasons, but it kind of drifted away.
It was 5 years later that Art Fry first heard about Spencer Silver's crazy glue. And it was not long after that when Fry had that awkward moment with his hymn book marker at church.
I thought, what I really need is a bookmark that will stick to the paper but not tear it apart. So, how do you get one that sticks more lightly?
Fry then realized that he already knew of a possible solution. It was sitting back in the laboratory, Silver's sticky spheres.
The next morning, I went back to the lab. I thought, well, I'll go get a sample from Spence.
I didn't know exactly what Art was going to do with it, but I knew he was a creative guy.
Fry applied the adhesive to the back of a bookmark and planned to test it in his hymn book the next time he was at church. But he was already wondering about the possibility of others wanting slightly sticky bookmarks. If it worked out, he may have a winner. However, his first test didn't go quite according to plan. The bookmarks stuck perfectly, but...
Horrors. When I removed them, the adhesive came off, and those pages stuck together for years later. And so I realized that this product has a lot of responsibility. I have to weld those adhesive particles to that paper so they can't possibly come off.
So Fry had to work out how to glue the glue so it didn't come off. Back in the laboratory, he painted a chemical primer on the back of the bookmark to help the glue stick. Then he put the glue on top. Fry tested it and it worked. The glue stayed stuck. But when he handed out sample bookmark pads around 3M, he discovered his product had a fatal commercial flaw.
They liked them, but when I came back a couple weeks later, they hadn't used up the pad. that I give them, and that's kind of discouraging. We like things that people use up and buy again, you know.
Fry put aside the disappointing product and caught up on some reports. Without thinking, he jotted a note to his boss using one of his new bookmarks and stuck it to the document, never suspecting he was about to invent a huge product.
Well, he wrote the answer right on that note and stuck it on something to be sending back to my office.
And it was at that point that Fry realized the product was not just a bookmark, but a whole new method of communicating. An office revolution was about to begin.
Oh my gosh. It was a wonderful feeling because we knew that what we had was good.
The timing could not have been better. In the 1970s, the office was covered with paper.
Gosh, we could make them in pads, we can make them in rolls, we can make labels with these things, we can make tapes with this, because it works with paper. Nobody had made a system that works with paper.
Everybody needed a way to keep track of it. Fry had finally found the problem that the sticky paper was a solution to. And everyone knew what happened next. The sticky Post-it pads were a worldwide smash hit.
You could stick them in paper, you can stick them on the refrigerator.
The idea that you can put just a few sentences or a few words on a little note, stick it up somewhere, send it to somebody, it's Twitter. This is Twitter before computers.
However, neither Fry nor Silver ever received any special financial reward for the invention. But both were named into the American Inventors Hall of Fame.
People just love Post-it notes. It's sort of like having invented ice cream. Everybody likes them.
Other inventions of the decade. 1974, the touchscreen.
Touching the keyboard or the screen produces immediate response.
The new sensor technology meant an end to button pushing. And in 1971, Salyut-1, the first space research laboratory, was launched by the Soviet Union. It is reliable, it is versatile, and it is fearless. The bomb disposal robot enables bomb squads to do their deadly job from a distance. And it began with an eccentric military man who had a crazy idea. In 1972, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Miller was packing up after a devastating day at the British Army's Weapons and Explosives Testing Centre. 2 British soldiers had been blown up in Northern Ireland while trying to dismantle an IRA bomb. The paramilitary's attacks were beginning to occur more frequently and were getting nastier. One mode of attack was the IRA's car bomb, and it was particularly lethal for bomb disposal crews.
They had to take what was called the long walk, and they had to walk up to the car and look in the window and see if there was a bomb in it or what sort of bomb it might be. It was a very dangerous job. Sometimes they would have had to find a way to open the car and take the risk of that before they could even look at the bomb and attempt to defuse it. So it took an incredible amount of courage and patience and concentration on the part of those chaps.
The British Army was desperate for a solution, and Peter Miller was tasked with trying to find one. Miller was a maverick, well known for his creative solutions to everyday problems.
Peter Miller is certainly a man who thinks outside the box and who would come up with unorthodox solutions to things. I think I did hear a story that he had also come up with some sort of automatic clothesline which collapsed up and down, but that it didn't really work well.
Miller's slightly mad engineering wizardry had already improved all kinds of military equipment, from tanks to portable shields.
It's a measure of sort of how off the wall he was, that he had used his skills and his inventiveness to develop a lawnmower which he could remotely control and cut his grass. while he could sit and have a gin and tonic and watch.
He realized what was needed in Northern Ireland was a device to allow the operators to defuse car bombs without having to go near them. Whatever he developed had to be simple and something he could create fast. Miller's quirky mind kept thinking of that remote control lawnmower he built using ropes, which cut his grass as it circled around a pole. Miller then had an idea that he thought might just work. What if he modified the lawnmower chassis and system of ropes to create a remote-controlled vehicle? A tow hook could pull the suspicious car away to a safe location, surrounded by sandbags, and then blown up. No one need ever go near it. A lawnmower would work, but Miller spotted something even better. A motorized wheelbarrow. Its flat, low chassis would make a perfect platform.
Excuse me, mate. Where did you get this?
The sod?
No. The wheelbarrow.
From the garden centre.
Miller didn't waste any time. He bought a wheelbarrow and drew up some sketches. Miller and his team quickly began work putting together this improvised invention.
So urgent was the need. All the channels of bureaucracy were all bypassed completely. They were given a blank check virtually to develop this and to get on with it.
They stripped it down to the bare chassis and engine, added a tow hook and a primitive system of ropes so it could be steered from a distance.
It was just very basic, very simple. It was very much a made-up contraption.
By the 30th of March, Miller had built a crude prototype. A motorized platform with a spring-loaded grappling hook at the end of a boom. It was remote-controlled, but in a basic way, as it was operated by using long ropes. That night, Miller received another call from Belfast.
Boss.
Yes?
Telephone call. Yes?
Another operator had died while trying to defuse a bomb. A man with 20 years of experience, who left behind a wife and 3 children.
He walked up to the device and he shone his torch into it. And he just turned to walk away from the device when it exploded. He was blown across the street and through the window of a shop opposite and died instantly.
The situation was so urgent, the army ordered Miller to put his invention on the plane to Belfast that night. After just a few weeks of trials, it would be put to the ultimate test. On the 26th of June, 1972, a bomb was found inside a car at a Belfast car dealership. The bomb experts also suspected that the doors were booby-trapped. Controlled from a safe distance using 30 meters of rope, the wheelbarrow slowly moved towards the car. As it got closer, the operator paused. If the car was booby-trapped and he bumped it, it could blow up on the spot. The operator extended the grappling hook slowly. Everyone anxiously waited as it extended. Finally, it hooked onto the bumper without triggering an explosion. Then an armored vehicle, well out of range, began towing both vehicles away. But there was a hitch.
As they were attempting to tow it back out, the wheelbarrow turned over. It went upside down and the plot had to be abandoned halfway through. In the end, they fired rockets at the car to detonate it.
It may have seemed like a complete failure, but not to Miller. He realized that the idea would work with a few modifications.
Thanks to Peter Miller, bomb disposal became a hands-off operation rather than a hands-on operation.
And Miller had barely begun.
There was no shopping list, as it were. The first idea was, could we find a way to tow the car bombs to safer ground where we could surround them with sandbags and minimise the effects of an explosion? And then As experience and the problem developed, they thought maybe we should be able to do other things.
He was soon adding all sorts of new bits to his remote control contraption, even tank tracks to enable it to go upstairs.
Every time a bomb disposal officer was killed in Belfast, Peter Miller and his colleagues were on the telephone to find out what had happened. Was there a piece of equipment that might have helped them?
Miller's invention quickly changed from a basic garden wheelbarrow into a highly sophisticated remote-controlled robot.
His invention transformed the way bombs are dealt with. It has saved many lives. Peter Miller is regarded in the bomb disposal industry as the man who made the difference.
And it earned him the gratitude from bomb disposal operatives everywhere. In the past, holiday snaps had to be sent away to be developed. Now, digital cameras mean pictures can be instantly viewed and shared with whomever. And it is thanks to a junior engineer who had time on his hands. In 1974 at Eastman Kodak in New York, Steve Sasson's boss was about to hand him something to keep him busy.
Mr. Sasson.
Yes, sir?
Here's a camera and a CCD chip. See what you can do with it.
Yes, sir.
Sasson had just finished college, and he was keen to learn.
When I first started at Kodak, I was living a bit of a dream I had. As a kid, I was always interested in electronics, and I built stuff at home. I took parts off of old TV sets, built transmitters and stereos. I just thought it was really neat. I liked it, you know.
He had a feeling that the CCD his boss had given him was the way of the future that nobody had yet exploited. The CCD, or Charged Coupled Device, was an experimental silicon chip. It was extremely small, but could store huge amounts of information by converting light into electrical charges that store data. Steve's bosses thought that if it could store data, did it have the potential for storing or capturing images?
What I said is, if I'm going to store an image, I want to capture images, and then I want to be able to go around and capture different images, so I would like to build a camera.
Instead of using film, he would try to capture photographs using CCD. He was picturing a camera that was completely revolutionary. Sasson thought that when the light passed through the lens and fell on the CCD, its photosensitive detectors would convert it into electrical charges. These charges would then be converted into a series of numbers that described the original image. The captured information would be stored on a magnetic tape cassette.
I had no idea how to do it, but I just thought I couldn't see any reason why it couldn't be built.
A lab technician helped him to pilfer bits and pieces from Kodak's spare parts bins, circuit boards, chips from a used voltmeter, and an old film camera lens.
Will this one work? Let's give it a try.
Sasson then began to build the digital circuitry.
The lens I used was a lens from an XL movie camera, you know, one of our Super 8 movie cameras. I used that entire lens assembly, and instead of having the film plane where the film would go, I put that charged coupled device chip right there. So it saved me a lot of work because I didn't know how to design lenses, and I didn't have a budget to do any special lens.
In a back room at Kodak, they assembled a tangle of wires and circuit boards. Sasson's filmless digital camera gradually took shape. The CCD was capturing the images, but they just couldn't see them.
Start off to see if you could just get the device to work, and then you'd say, can I digitize it? And you sort of solve one problem after the next.
The next problem was to build a special machine that could convert the digital information into an image that could be viewed. The machine would read the digital data taken from the CCD, turn it into a video signal, and play it back on a TV screen. It took a few months and 10 kilograms of technology, but Sasson and his technician, Jim Schickler, finally connected the camera to the playback machine. In December 1975, they had a basic prototype.
It was a box sitting on top of like a frame that had a bunch of circuit boards in it.
The odd-looking device was the size of a toaster and weighed over 3.5 kilograms. But would it work? And more importantly, whose picture to take? Sassen's or Schickler's? Sassen had a better idea.
Just 1 second. Hold on 1 second.
He returned with a young lab technician who was far more photogenic than either of the bleary-eyed scientists who had spent too long in the laboratory. They had worked for over a year for this moment, and all that was left was to push the button and hope. The primitive prototype took 23 seconds to capture and record the image. Then, the playback machine sent their picture to the TV. It was the moment of truth. Her face was a digital blur, but Sassen was very pleased with himself.
Jim and I were staring at the monitor, and we were overjoyed at what we saw, because we knew there were 1,000 reasons why you might not see anything at all.
It needs work.
The scientists knew there must be a reason her image was so blurry.
Hold on. Then you get the, oh, I know what I did.
They discovered it was a simple solution, as he'd accidentally crossed 2 wires. So they tried again. Suddenly, the world's first digital photograph became clear.
And we were very, very happy. You know, wow, it actually does work.
Congratulations. Congratulations to you. I can't even believe that.
So did Kodak instantly jump on Sassen's new photographic wonder? No. Selling film and processing it had been the company's business for 136 years. So a filmless camera would be a competitor. And besides, the technology was still far too big. It was not until the 1990s, 25 years after he took his first picture, that the revolution in photo technology that Sassen started finally took off. It changed not just the way pictures are taken, but what are snapped and how they're shared.
There's more opportunity to capture those images, to communicate the human condition around the world, because everybody has now access to the technology that enables them to be able to do that.
And for that, Sassen received the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. He even had his picture taken beside Obama. More inventions of the 1970s. 1971, the food processor. An invention by a French catering company salesman that made mashing easier in the kitchen. 1977, the MRI uses magnetic fields to scan the body, sending out radio waves that can detect cancer cells. And 1974, the Rubik's Cube, a puzzle invented by a Hungarian professor for his students that became a worldwide obsession.
Once you get your hands on Rubik's Cube, you may never be able to put it down.
Ever since cars were invented, designers experimented with all sorts of exotic body styles. But what powered them always stayed the same: petrol, diesel, or electric. That was until an engineer from New York developed a car that used the best of both. In 1970, Victor Woke was determined to convince the world that a battery-powered engine was the best way to power cars. Except, after a year working on a prototype, he was not so sure. Although Woke was not afraid to get his hands dirty, his appearance was deceptive.
My father was a brilliant man, and a lot of his invention came from thinking about things, so he wasn't a backyard tinkerer.
Woke had a PhD in electrical engineering and worked on components for planes, high-voltage electricity, and even the Manhattan Project that developed the first atomic bomb. All before he decided to try to revolutionize the car.
My father was an extremely driven person. He spent a tremendous amount of hours at work. He was a problem solver.
And in the US in the 1970s, it was a problem that needed a solution, because it was a time of the gas-guzzling car. Americans adored their big, fast cars, which had lots of power. Emissions and fuel efficiency were not even heard of, and were the last things on people's minds.
We were heading for the moon. Anything was possible. Bigger, better, more powerful. That defined success.
Woke's interest in alternatives to cars that guzzled petrol and polluted began as a student at college. He helped build an electric car that won a student race across the US. But 3 decades and several unsatisfactory car conversions later, he was convinced that a totally electric car was just not going to work.
The fundamental problem with the all-electric vehicle is the battery. A normal battery compared to gasoline carries about 1/10 as much energy.
Batteries could not store enough energy to travel far enough or fast enough to compete with a petrol car. Then Woke thought that there must be a method to combine the power of a petrol engine with the cleanliness and fuel efficiency of an electrical engine. He began to plan how he could build a hybrid of the two. He envisioned using a petrol engine to power an electric motor that drove the wheels. The beauty of his idea was that the petrol engine would run at a constant speed. No revving up or down meant lower emissions. It would also be extremely efficient because the electric motor would use only part of the petrol engine's power at slow speeds, storing the rest in the batteries. When the car accelerated, the batteries would provide the extra power. Lowering petrol usage and cutting emissions without reducing performance had a lot of appeal. But the idea was about to become more appealing. Chemical engineer Charlie Rosson, a fellow hybrid enthusiast, brought news of a new government program aimed at encouraging cleaner running cars. It was called the Federal Clean Car Incentive Program. Slowly, the US was becoming aware of its pollution problem, and the newly formed Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, offered to pay thousands for any experimental car that met its strict new emission standards.
The program said you have to build the car, but if it passes, then the government will buy 10 of them for $30,000.
Woke jumped at the opportunity. He and Rosson formed a company and set out to build the world's first marketable hybrid car. They began by getting hold of an old gas guzzler, which had exactly what was needed under the bonnet. Plenty of space. They would need every bit of it for the two separate systems, the petrol engine and electric motor, and a nest of connecting wires.
They had to put all of this stuff into a car. You had an electronics expert, and you had a chemist. Neither of them were automotive engineers.
So before they began, they hired a good mechanic.
We got a lot of work to do. Let's get started.
The team of 3 now started to build. First, they removed the car's huge V8 engine, and then worked out how to fit in the complex arrangement of components.
I think the more difficult it became, the more he enjoyed it.
After 2 years of work, world events gave the inventors another incentive. A conflict in the Middle East caused an oil shortage, and petrol prices soared. Woke's crazy hybrid was beginning to make more sense every day. By 1974, they had fitted a bank of batteries into the boot and connected the two systems that would power the car. Their hybrid motor was beginning to take shape, but it was at a cost. For Woke, what had begun as a dream was becoming all-consuming.
It became his life almost to the exclusion of other things. He would spend hours and hours working on a problem, and it became close to an obsession.
And there was plenty to be obsessed about. If Woke couldn't get longer life out of his batteries, his car would not pass the government test. So he experimented with an innovative braking system called regenerative braking.
When you slow down a car, what do you do with all that energy?
Normally, when a car brakes, the lost forward energy is dissipated through friction as heat. In Woke's hybrid, that energy was harvested to help recharge the batteries. Finally, it was time to see how it all worked during a test. He had finished the hybrid petrol-electric vehicle that he had been dreaming of for so many years. It consumed petrol at half the rate of other cars on the road. All it required was the EPA approval. But a bombshell was about to drop.
Yes.
Woke called the EPA to book the emissions test, but the Clean Car Incentive Program had been stopped. The government had no interest in even looking at the car. It was 1974. The Arab oil embargo was over. Petrol was cheap again, and clean, efficient cars were no longer the priority.
When my father learned that the initiative had been canceled, he was somewhere between furious and depressed. But he continued on.
Woke was a man who didn't give up that easily. He continued to lobby, and with a little help from scientific friends in high places, he finally convinced the EPA to do the test. He had everything and more wrapped up in this car. Woke and Rosen both knew getting approval from the EPA was the only way they would realize their dream.
And then the car was packed up and shipped out to Michigan.
4 years of work, and it all came down to this one test. The EPA man put the car through its paces at the testing center. He was extremely impressed. The car ran at half its former petrol consumption and an astonishing 1/20th of the emissions.
The hybrid was the only vehicle which actually met all the requirements of the EPA tests. They were so proud of that.
But despite the apparent success of the field tests, Woke was shocked to learn that just a month later it was rejected. His family think that at the time, the EPA simply didn't want a hybrid car.
They weren't interested. He tried to use political influence. It didn't help.
But Woke fought on for 2 more years, until he eventually ran out of money and was forced to stop.
It was a very bad time for him.
For the next 25 years, the hybrid idea lay dormant. In the US, petrol was too cheap, but not in Japan. In 1997, Toyota launched Prius, the first hybrid car to reach the market. In consultation with Woke, they even used many of his technical innovations. Prius was a hit, and guess who bought one?
My father was so happy when the Prius came out. If anybody sat in it, and in fact, if you visited him, you had to, he would take you around and show you what it was doing. He loved it.
Today, well over 4.5 million hybrids have been sold. Victor Woke, the godfather of hybrid car technology, has finally been vindicated.